Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most pressing stories coming out of Russia right now, a crisis that has been quietly building but is now impossible to ignore. Across major cities and rural regions alike, fuel shortages are paralyzing daily life, disrupting industries, and raising serious questions about how Russia's internal economy is functioning under the weight of ongoing war pressures and international isolation. This is not just about a few gas stations running dry. It's a problem that touches transport, agriculture, and even the country's ability to project power abroad. For ordinary Russians, the situation is hitting home in the most direct way possible. Long lines have been forming outside gas stations in multiple regions, with some stations simply closing down altogether after running out of supplies. Prices for both gasoline and diesel have shot up dramatically in the past few weeks, straining already tight household budgets. For a country that has long prided itself on being an energy superpower, the idea of Russians queuing for fuel is a striking image that undermines the government's narrative of strength and self-sufficiency. The roots of this crisis go deeper than just temporary disruptions. Analysts point to a combination of structural issues in Russia's refining sector, export priorities, and the ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia's economy is heavily dependent on energy exports, particularly oil and gas. To keep the war machine funded, Moscow has been focusing on maximizing revenues from these exports. This often means that domestic supplies take a back seat, leaving ordinary citizens and local industries scrambling when demand rises or when logistical bottlenecks appear. Farmers in particular are feeling the squeeze. With the harvest season underway, diesel shortages are proving catastrophic for agriculture. Tractors, combines, and trucks need steady supplies of fuel to operate, and delays in harvesting can lead to massive losses in crops. In a country where agriculture is a vital part of the economy and also a key factor in food security, this is not just a minor inconvenience. Reports from rural regions suggest that some farmers are already cutting back operations or paying exorbitant black market prices just to keep going. The transportation sector is equally vulnerable. Long-haul truckers are struggling to secure enough fuel to complete deliveries, which in turn leads to shortages of goods in cities and rising prices for basic products. This creates a ripple effect through the entire economy. Food prices increase, industrial supply chains stall, and local businesses find it harder to operate. For Russians who are already feeling the pain of inflation, this adds yet another layer of hardship. One of the more ironic aspects of this crisis is that it's happening in a country that pumps millions of barrels of oil every day. Yet the refining and distribution systems are stretched thin. Sanctions have limited access to advanced technology and spare parts, making it more difficult to maintain refining capacity. At the same time, Russia has been redirecting fuel supplies to foreign buyers where it can earn hard currency. That strategy makes sense from a financial perspective, but it leaves the domestic market exposed to shortages whenever demand surges or production falters. There is also a political angle to consider. For years, the Kremlin has presented energy as both a symbol of national pride and a tool of foreign policy. Fuel shortages undermine both narratives. Domestically, they erode confidence in the government's ability to provide basic stability. Internationally, they signal weakness, raising questions about how sustainable Russia's war effort really is if it cannot even keep its own people supplied with fuel. This is particularly damaging given how much effort has gone into portraying Russia as resilient in the face of Western sanctions. The government is, of course, aware of the problem. Officials have announced measures aimed at stabilizing the market, including restricting exports of fuel to ensure domestic supplies. but such moves come with their own risks. Export restrictions may anger foreign buyers and reduce revenue at a time when every dollar matters for the Russian state. Moreover, quick, fixed measures often fail to address the underlying structural problems, meaning the shortages could resurface again and again in the future. Ordinary Russians are increasingly frustrated. Social media has been filled with videos and posts showing long fuel lines, empty pumps, and angry drivers. In some regions, tensions have boiled over into heated confrontations. This public visibility makes it harder for state-controlled media to downplay or spin the situation. Unlike abstract economic statistics, empty gas stations are something people can see and experience directly. That makes the fuel crisis a particularly dangerous political issue for the Kremlin. Economists warn that if the shortages continue, the impact on inflation could be severe. Higher fuel costs filter through to nearly every sector of the economy, from food production to manufacturing to transportation. Even if supply eventually stabilizes, the price shocks could linger for months, eroding living standards and weakening consumer confidence. For a government already grappling with the financial costs of war, this is another source of instability that cannot be easily brushed aside. The timing of the crisis also matters. With winter approaching, fuel demand is only expected to rise further. Heating, transport, and logistics all require additional supplies during the colder months. If shortages persist into the winter, the consequences could be even more severe, especially in Russia's more remote regions where supplies are harder to replenish quickly. The combination of fuel scarcity and winter conditions could create a perfect storm of economic and social stress. Beyond the immediate economic effects, the fuel crisis also exposes the limits of Russia's wartime economy. While the Kremlin has managed to keep the military effort funded through high energy revenues, the diversion of resources away from civilian needs creates fragility at home. Over time, these domestic strains could translate into reduced political support for the war, particularly if ordinary citizens feel they are bearing the costs while the state focuses on projecting strength abroad. Some analysts suggest that the crisis is also a reflection of how sanctions are beginning to bite more deeply. While Russia has found ways to reroute exports to Asia and other markets, the lack of Western technology and investment in its energy sector is slowly degrading efficiency. Refineries that once relied on imported parts or expertise now face difficulties keeping up with demand. This gradual erosion of capacity doesn't make headlines in the same way as a battlefield development, but over time it can be just as consequential. The question now is whether the Kremlin can find a sustainable solution. Restricting exports, tapping into reserves, or issuing subsidies may provide temporary relief, but unless the underlying issues of refining capacity and distribution are addressed, the problem is likely to return. In the meantime, ordinary Russians are left to cope with longer lines, higher prices, and growing frustration. For many, the irony is bitter. Their country is one of the world's biggest exporters of energy, yet they themselves struggle to fill their tanks. Looking ahead, the fuel shortages could have far-reaching consequences. Economically, they risk slowing down growth and increasing inflation. Politically, they erode the government's image of competence and stability. Strategically, they raise doubts about how long Russia can sustain both its domestic economy and its military operations abroad. The longer the shortages persist, the more pressure will build, and the harder it will be for the Kremlin to keep control of the narrative. In the end, this crisis is more than just a supply issue. It's a window into the broader vulnerabilities of Russia's wartime economy. As the war in Ukraine drags on and international sanctions continue, these internal strains are likely to grow more pronounced. Whether the Kremlin can manage them effectively, or whether they spiral into larger social and economic challenges, is a question that will shape Russia's future in the months and years to come. So, while the images of long fuel lines and empty gas stations may seem like a localized inconvenience, they are in fact signals of deeper cracks in the system. Cracks that could, over time, have a profound impact on Russia's stability at home and its ambitions abroad. And for ordinary Russians, the message is painfully clear. The costs of war are no longer just measured in distant battlefields, but in the daily struggle to fill up the tank and keep life moving.